And I'll start first of all by introducing the panel that we have here this morning. To my extreme left, we have Caleb Atemi, who is a veteran journalist. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
We're also joined by John Gashie, who is chair of Article 19. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. And last but not least, Evans Wafula, who is a journalist. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen, this morning for reviewing the press, but also later on we're going to have them in the newsroom, and of course we'll be highlighting the trip to the U.S. by the president. And of course, we are also expecting the Prime Minister for the UK, Theresa May, who's going to be touching down, if goes as planned, tomorrow. But for now, let's start off with the dailies. And we'll start off, of course, with the headline, which is the headline both for the Nation and the Standard. And of course, this is to do with the DCJ, the Deputy Chief Justice, charges facing the DCJ, and that is Philomena Mwilu. Of course, this being the top story. Let me start with you, Caleb. There are those who possibly so far have said that we've not had, quote-unquote, big fish,
yes.
Being brought before the courts. But here we are. Do they come bigger than this?
I think this is a shocker. It's a shocker. When they talked about the judiciary, most of us, in particular, myself, I never imagined that it would fall on the Deputy CJ.
All right. Mr. Gashie?
Yeah, for me, rather, it's the build-up to the way in which one of the media house had, shall I say, a trail, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And specifically the Nation.
The Nation, right? In that matter, and that they had that story for quite a while, and I was a little, how this was drip, the leaking, so to speak, that a media house, a Nation, had in itself fairly interesting tidbits and the tantalizing issues that were coming in.
Slowly,
and even just prior to yesterday, there was a figure of 12 million. And I was saying, oh, right. But again, I did not expect it to specifically the person at the moment. Perhaps my mind was elsewhere, so I said, when it happened, I said, oh.
It was a shocker for you as well.
Yes, in that, and I was saying, oh, something.
Okay, Mr. Wafula, was it a shocker for you as well? And like Mr. Gashie rightly puts it, there were drips and drabs of a very senior person in the corridors of justice was to be brought to book, but there are very few who would have expected it to go that far.
I think for me is that touching at the very nerve of the judiciary. I mean, the Supreme Court is the highest court in the land. Having just picked somebody from there, for me, I look at it in a positive way, because I think now the war on corruption is going to the next level. Probably what we expect is now we want to see probably even the executive itself being. I think it's a good sign that nobody is actually going to be left out. I think listening to the DPP, I think there's a determination that corruption has really been a big problem in this country. And one of my colleagues have talked about the big fish. Seeing that the judiciary itself has actually been touched, then we expect that nobody is going to be left in this war against corruption. We have seen governors being arraigned in court. We expect to see also the executive, if anybody has been implicated in corruption, let everybody be able to be held to account. Okay. And I think it's a good sign.
All right, Mr. Atemi, from a journalistic point of view, what do you expect that should unfold out of this now? Because one thing, obviously this is the headline today, but something else may happen tomorrow, but there's been a trail. Like you've mentioned, there have been governors who've been arrested, we've had members of parliament, now we have the DCJ who is before court. However, it is important to note that none has been charged.
Yes.
And as journalists, where do we need to take this story? What's the next level?
I think it behoves us to dig deeper into the murkier waters of corruption, to even try and focus the attention of the audiences in areas that we think the DPP needs to focus more. People that we may not have to name them, but you can pick out issues of corruption that the country needs to focus on, and that one can actually prepare the Kenyans on who could be the next big fish.
All right, and talking about big fish and corruption, let's look at page 7 of the Standard. Page 7 of the Standard. Court allows Wazuri to resume office because, well, he is also another one who is before, rather the DPP has arraigned in court, and this is on charges of corruption and abuse of office, but he now has been given permission to access his office, and that is under supervision. But again, still on the fight on corruption, Mr. Gashie.
Yes.
Kenya has battled corruption since independence. Would you say, from your experience, also, you know, where you're seeing this from, this is unprecedented, the levels at which we see this fight? I mean, when we look at, let's say, for instance, the, I forget, the likes of Patni, during that time, they were arrested, they were taken to court. There was a lot of, you know, momentum in regards to fighting corruption, but it somehow lost its wind in the way. Are we at an unprecedented point in time when we see the likes of Swazuri, you know, being brought before the courts of justice?
I would want to say that the country and indeed the international community and, you know, the region, we are all looking forward to a conviction. And I think we needed to go past the drama, because what we have at the moment is a fairly interesting soap opera of a kind of a drama. And I think you are hoping and praying that, one, the due process will take place in particular, and that they will be followed, and that the evidence that has been adduced, so to speak, will be worth it, in the sense that do not create great expectations. And I'm referring to, we've had this kind of soap operas in the past. And I will take you back. In 1963, 64, there was a huge story then about the then late Minister Paul Ngei and the May scandal. And then we've had similar issues, and then it fizzles out. Is this the real time that the knives, so to speak, the night of the long knives are out, and that things will be left, we are butchering people, so to speak? I don't know.
Remains to be seen.
And it remains to be seen. And I think, for me, perhaps is the message it sends is one thing, but will there be convictions? And is there another game plan, political or otherwise? And I think those are the issues. Who is next, therefore? Then we'll be having the so-called Russian roulette, where, you know, when will be the next
that
bullet.
barrel draws, who is the next one to be?
Who is the next one to be hit? Is it pata-poter, so to speak? Is it a rotary here?
Right. Okay, Wafula, what is it that you'd expect now from here? Because yes, the arrests are a good starting point, or a starting point. Let me not say a good starting point, but a starting point for on the one corruption. But the question is, what happens after this? We've seen many slip through.
I think what has happened is that some people in this country have made corruption to be an enterprise. And I think these are efforts to dismantle that notion. But most importantly, I think, is that having seen this kind of arrests, and listening also to the DPP, he has linked corruption to the very social fabric of our society, whereby even if inflated electricity bill, somebody does that because they want to benefit. The maize scandal, the sugar scandal. And I think what is important is that corruption demeans the rule of law. It undermines human rights. So we expect to see that a lot of things improving, and especially the economy. Because corruption has made the economy of this country to be within the hands of a few people. So we think, I think the most important thing we expect to see from all this is dismantling that enterprise called corruption.
Okay, and let's now look at page 10 of the Standard, page 10 of the Standard. And I don't know if, gentlemen, your survey with social media, but this picture was awash on social media, and the reason why it was awash on social media, and I'd like to hear from you, especially Atemi, you're a journalist, and we believe in the power of the pen.
Yeah.
I don't know, well, I was taught that whatever is worth remembering is worth writing. And why it was awash on social media, on the Kenyan side of the table, there are no pens and papers. On the American side, they all are armed with pens and papers. But of course, we're going to be looking at this particular visit in detail. But your thoughts on this particular picture? Let's start with that.
Actually, I was both amused and ashamed at the same time, because I've been trained to keep a record, not just mental, but everything that is worthy must be put in writing.
Correct.
And in the past, both as a reporter and as a PR practitioner, you can never go out with your boss without pen and paper. That's a big audience. You're going to meet your peers and your colleagues in the US. At least it's worthy noting down.
Well, one might say that maybe in this day and age of technology, do they have their phones? I can't see their phones there. I was going to say maybe. They're recording.
I don't.
And you know, Sonko has taught us that you can also record.
As I said, we were having a joke, and I said, possibly with the age of technology and our cabinet being fairly techno savvy, they had their phones on to record this. So I wouldn't begrudge them on this one, but it's quite an interesting issue. Possibly they were recording. You never know. You might get.
Hope so.
Hope so.
But you have a history of our ministers traveling abroad just for holidaying. The president is busy.
Well, in Kenya we have a term for it. We call it benchmarking.
Benchmarking, yes. So with that background, I doubt that they are recording anything.
Maybe they are benchmarking on how not to write. Wafula.
My thinking is that, and I agree with Caleb, is that some of these leaders, some of them appear to be political tourists. And you see, when you go to a place where you are not serious, you are going to benchmark or you are going to tour, you will appear this way. I think, and then the excitement about Donald Trump. Some of them probably just wanted to meet this man, Donald Trump, and see what he looks like. I mean, because
in person.
Yeah, in person. And I think they look mesmerized. I think the most decent thing, the handlers of the president, I think once he sits down, somebody should have put there a pen and paper, and just for him to be able to take notes.
I think that there's what I would be worried about is even if you put a pen and paper, to me it already tells me from their body language they're not intending to write anything. So even if you put a pen and paper, really, at the end of the day, it looks
this is a bunch of political tourists.
But I would want to say this. I think I'm not really pushing or a defender, but in terms of protocol, when a state visit is planned, indeed, you do not carry passengers on the basis because you have to give, in terms of protocol, who members of your delegations are. So let's also not, on the basis that we feel that everybody is benchmarking and what have you, a state visit, there are a lot of things that have to be sorted out in terms of protocol, sitting arrangements, the people who be encountering, and you just don't carry your friend just because you are president. They must have been cleared in terms that we will be having Minister B, C, and what have you. So you just don't clash. All I'm saying, and I think a lot you don't. A state visit protocol in terms of how you handle about the niceties and the etiquette does not allow.
Okay, and I think what Wafula is referring to as political tourists is that yes, their names were there, yes, they knew they were going, but the question is, what were they going to do?
And I want to make sure that it's been documented by historians and writers like Martin Meredith.
Yes.
For decades, African leaders have been known to benchmark. From the days of Mobutu Sese Seko to Daniel Arap Moi to Museveni, they carry so-called ministers, but most of them are just tourists.
They're there for the ride. They're joyriders, as it were. But I guess they say that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, so we'll wait and see what the goodies they have brought, and if there are any goodies at all. And of course, we're going to be going into more details of that particular trip in the newsroom and how that can be reported. But let's now change focus and take a look at the Nation. And on page 5, this again is to do, of course, the Nation headline is how Mwilu finally fell, and this is the DCJ who is going to appear before the court this morning. It was not possible for her to answer charges yesterday based on the time because this was after 5 p.m. So the judge said that she would have to come back this morning. So at 9 a.m. we're expecting her to be arraigned in court and answer to the charges that are before her. So that's a headline on the Daily Nation. But looking at page 5 of the Nation, third occupant jinxed office trips, and this of course is the office of the DCJ. Again, looking at how sometimes we look at stories and maybe how we phrase them. Let me start with you, Mr. Gashie. Is this office of the DCJ jinxed? And just to jog the memory of our viewers, we've got Nancy Baraza. Remember her story where she pinched a security guard and said, you should know people.
Yes.
We also have Kalpana Rawal, who wanted to almost stay in office by force. Now we are waiting for Philomena Mwilu's case to be heard. But to you, Mr. Gashie.
Yes, I hope it is not jinxed, and I pray that it is not. But perhaps for me, the bigger issue is that it appears that almost every time we've got a senior personality occupying that position in terms of gender, and a woman, and a leading woman, something usually comes a cropper. And I'm saying, is it jinxed on account of the gender? Could it have been otherwise if then we had, a CJ who was then a woman? Would it perhaps have opened? But I think it also raises a lot of issues as to how the positions have been processed and occupied. And I think perhaps we should look at that. How they end up there. The vetting process, the nomination, and then perhaps for me is the background check, so to speak. Indeed, if you look at the three of them, the background checks and what the political situation, the background under which they came in, they occupy that position. What was at play?
What was at play? Wafula, your thoughts on that and how we phrased this third occupant jinxed office? But then again, like Mr. Gashie mentions, it is specifically women who've occupied that position. Could there be a gender role in it?
Not really. I think this appears to be like a theater of the absurd. But most important is for us to know that being in a position of a Deputy Chief of Justice, I think it's more or less of being able to be given also some kind of support. I think maybe somebody would argue that are they receiving enough support in their work, and also the kind of motivation, not in terms of finance, but in terms of being able, because somebody will argue that, and I'm not really trying to accuse anybody, but that mostly women, even when we work with them, is that we really need also to be able to give them a lot of support. And I don't know whether she received that support in the judiciary. Looking at these cases that have come.
But what sort of support? Because I would like to imagine, like Mr. Gashie has mentioned, if you indeed qualify for that position, if you indeed are well suited for that position, then really it's you to do your job.
I think the Chief Justice has come so much out in defense of the judiciary, and in particular in defense of the Supreme Court. And I think even the JSC itself has also been very clear. So I think what I think is that some of these accusations, and I agree with my colleagues here that if you go through the voting processes and look at what happened, for example, to Miguna, he went through voting process and he was cleared to vie for position of governor. Later on, they are saying that he was not fit. He's not a Kenyan.
He's not a Kenyan.
And the same thing appears to, for example, the case of Mwilu. She went through voting. The issue of betting, the issue of integrity were raised. People who had complaints against her, the complaints were brought forward, and she was cleared.
All right, we'll need to wind up and take a break. Mr. Atemi, very briefly.
For me, being a Kenyan, I become very skeptical, and I don't think this jinx. Probably, I believe because I can see the NIS hand in the national story, the preparation for the court case. I believe, in my view, it might have something to do with succession.
Yes.
In
2022. And of course, that is what is going to play out as we carry on. But for